Well, good afternoon to you. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. This very hour, we'll have Joe Concha join us at 3:30. We'll talk to him about the latest in the Biden presidency. Also, this Boston mayor who decided to throw a no whites allowed Christmas party. You know, it's the Christmas spirit. Joe's going to respond to that. John Reed is here at 4:30, a radio host based out of Richmond. He's got a lot to say about this decision by the Biden administration to attempt to erase the history of the left in America by removing a monument that marks it from Arlington today. More on that story in a moment. And Corey DeAngelis is here. He's been so good at fighting back against the teachers' unions that they now have declared him enemy number one. Corey will react to the new honor. That's ahead at 5 o'clock. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Great to have you with us. A programming note for you. Later this week, I will be having our friend Tucker Carlson on the program. It will be on Wednesday that we are chatting with him. We'll find out all of the latest from him on his new ventures, what he's up to, what it was like leaving Fox. That's all ahead with Tucker this Wednesday here on the Vince Columnist Show. So you have that to look forward to. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to get into some more detail. This decision to remove a monument in Arlington that is dedicated to the reconciliation of the United States in the wake of the Civil War, which seems like kind of an important moment in our history, doesn't it? I mean, we had a very bloody Civil War, hundreds of thousands dead, and it was just complete. I mean, the country, as you know, I mean, given the nature of the Civil War, was on the precipice of destruction. And it was held together. Abraham Lincoln, the Union, hold it together. General Grant. And in the wake of that, you have to figure out, what are you going to do as a country? You really have two big options. One is to salt the earth, to destroy every single person who was involved in the rebellion, and just destroy them and their families and their life, their family lines, everything about them. Or the alternative would be figure out a way to grow together as a country again and go into the future, to reconcile. And that latter option is what America chose, was to figure out a way to reconcile and to come together. And is that process going to be difficult? Yeah, and history demonstrates it was. But during that process, the United States decided at the turn of the last century to do a couple things. Well, one, they were coming out of the Spanish-American War, in which you had Confederate soldiers, people who had been a part of Confederate states, fighting valiantly on behalf of the United States of America alongside their northern brethren. So now we had a major war in which you had men from both the North and the South fighting together against a common enemy. And they grew close again in that. And in the midst of that, you also had President McKinley, a Republican who was assassinated. President McKinley comes out and says that it is fitting that we dedicate a monument to reconciliation, that we can bring the country together. And ultimately, the product of that decision is the very monument that the Biden administration is tearing down today, or attempting to. You heard a moment ago on the news, on our newscast, that a judge, a Trump-appointed, and interesting for this story, a black man, a Trump-appointed judge, has actually halted the destruction of this monument today. Halted it. Because out of concern that the grave sites around the monument might be disturbed. Now, what are the grave sites around the monument? It's worth laying out some of the details here. This is Section 16. Section 16 are Confederate graves. Confederate grave sites at Arlington National Cemetery. And it's not a mistake. In fact, it was 1900 in which the Congress decided that Confederate remains should be moved to Arlington National Cemetery. They designated that special section for them. We now know it as Section 16. They would subsequently erect this memorial. It's called the Confederate Memorial, but its purpose is one of national reconciliation. It was erected there in 1914. Now, this follows the custom of Arlington National Cemetery. This seems important, right? These are details that may be lost in all of the lame, useless news coverage of this subject today. The Arlington Cemetery's official government website describes all of this way. They write, in 1900, Congress authorized Confederate remains to be reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery, which designated a special section for them in what is now Section 16. The Confederate Memorial was erected there in 1914. By the early 1900s, it had become tradition to establish a new section at Arlington for the dead from a particular war, followed by a commemorative monument. So in Section 22, where many soldiers and sailors from the Spanish-American War are buried, the Spanish-American War Monument and the Rough Riders Monument, which Teddy Roosevelt assembled, memorialized that conflict. After fallen World War I service members were repatriated and buried in Sections 18 and 19, the Argonne Cross was dedicated in Section 18. In this sense, the creation of a Confederate section and memorial followed customary practice at Arlington. Okay? So each of the sections has a memorial in the center, a monument that's dedicated to the conflict that section represents. So in this one, in this section, Section 16, where you have Confederate headstones, grave sites, right in the center of it is a monument that's dedicated not to the cause of the Confederacy, but to the reconciliation of the country in the wake of the Civil War. It's a unique section of Arlington, isn't it? It's different because it's not the kind of thing that we all look back upon and say, okay, we were all together on one side of this issue. No, these were Americans fighting Americans. And so the goal was reconciliation. Now, I've noticed a couple of smart people saying this today. You know, the fact is the left wants to tear this down because this is their habit. It doesn't matter what it is. They want to tear down American history. But in particular, and Sean may not have laid out this point in specificity, but in particular, they really like tearing down statues that demonstrate the sins of their own party, don't they? The Confederacy is a defining feature of the Democrat Party's history. It is the seminal feature of the Democrat Party's history. And so all of the renaming and the tearing down and the ripping apart, so much of this is being led by a group that's trying to keep the American public from being aware of their history. One. Two, what does this bode for the future of our country and our ability to reconcile over things that appear to be irreconcilable differences? What does this bode? Right now, do you get the sense that the left is so far away from you that you can't even imagine ever coming back together? Do you ever get that feeling? On a variety of issues, whether it's the cult of human sacrifice that they've dedicated themselves to, whether it's the authoritarian use of government to punish their political opponents that they've dedicated themselves to, whether it's the interference in our elections that they seem to be perfectly happy with, removing the top candidate from the opposing party from the ballot all across the country, using the justice system to try and imprison him. These are things that it gets to the point where you're like, this is irreconcilable. I don't even know how I can deal with these people. How can you have a meeting of the minds when the other side has become this fascistic, this destructive? They don't even allow open debate. All of the places where we're supposed to have free debate, what is happening on social media? What is happening on these major corporate news outlets? They're shutting down countervailing viewpoints, demonizing political opponents, and treating them as if they're so contemptible that these people either need to be imprisoned or removed from polite society entirely, or worse. So that's the state of affairs right now. And just imagine how horrific it was during the Civil War. And in the wake of that, they were able to reconcile, that there were able to be some signs of this. Now, not all Confederates wanted that, I should emphasize. There's an excellent piece today in The Blaze that focuses on this. And goes back down the history of all of this. They say, Union Army veteran President William McKinley supported this legislation in 1900 to establish a Confederate section in Arlington Cemetery, proclaimed 4 days after men from former Confederate states ensured America's victory against Spanish forces. This is the Spanish-American War they're referencing. Quote, in the spirit of fraternity, this is McKinley speaking, in the spirit of fraternity, we should share with you in the care of the graves of Confederate soldiers. Sectional feeling should no longer holds back the love we feel for each other. The old flag again waves over us in peace with new glories. The Blaze says that the American Conservative underscored that it was long understood to be a reconciliation monument, such that some Confederate groups at the time opposed the statue and the memorial precisely because they opposed the reconciliation that it symbolized. So what do you have? You have the Democrats of the time, when this monument was dedicated, opposed it being assembled. You had a number of Confederate groups who did not want a reconciliation monument to sit above the grave sites of Confederate soldiers. They didn't want that. So in a sense, Biden is finishing what the Confederacy desired. The Confederates didn't want the monument up, and guess what Biden's delivering now? He's tearing it down. And at the moment, it's on pause, as I mentioned. You have a judge who's jumped in today to say that there's some evidence that there could be some evidence here that the grave sites are being disturbed around the monument, and they should not be. Now, we had an on-the-scene reporter there this morning. Corey, our producer, was there in Arlington. Corey's not on microphone right now, but Corey, just you can give me some head nods on this subject. When you were there, was the machinery over the top of any of the grave sites? Could you tell? No, it was not at the time. Well, Corey was one of the first out there this morning. A lot more people started showing up after that. And there's some images of the machinery there, but they had cranes, they had trucks, they were ready to go. They were ready to remove this thing today. And a judge has intervened because of a last-minute lawsuit here, alleging that there has been, and there is currently going on to be some disturbance of the grave sites there. And this is an NBC4's report here, a federal judge on Monday issued a temporary restraining order barring removal of a memorial to Confederate soldiers at Arlington National Cemetery. Again, this is not exactly right. It is, in some sense, a memorial to Confederate soldiers, but it's meant to be a reconciliation monument. A group called Defend Arlington, affiliated with a group called Save Southern Heritage Florida, filed a lawsuit Sunday in federal court in Alexandria, Florida, seeking the restraining order. A hearing has been scheduled for Wednesday. So, the delay goes on at least through midweek this week. Work to remove the memorial had begun Monday before the restraining order was issued, but the memorial remains in place on cemetery grounds. The cemetery said on Friday expected to complete the removal this week. It said the removal was required by Congress and that it was complying with environmental and historic preservation regulations. This idea that it was, quote, required by Congress, not exactly. This was a part of a 2021 NDAA that launched this naming commission, which was supposed to look at renaming bases and making sure that there weren't things that honored Confederates all throughout the DOD. That would include Arlington. The commission, I saw Byron York emphasize this point today, the commission didn't choose to rename this monument. Although it is called the Confederate Monument, they could rename it the Reconciliation Monument specifically if they'd like to. That's not what they chose. They only chose to tear this thing down. That is the only thing they chose. And so the lawsuit here is saying that this is going to desecrate, damage, and destroy many of the grave sites there. The temporary restraining order issued Monday by U.S. District Judge Rossi Alston said that a lawyer for the plaintiffs represented to the court that the work does involve the disturbance of grave sites. In a footnote, Alston wrote that he takes very seriously the representation of officers of the court, and should the representations in this case be untrue or exaggerated, the court may take appropriate sanctions. So Alston is saying, one, we're halting this for the moment, but two, you better be telling me the truth about these grave sites being disturbed and that it's likely that they will be, or else there could be some consequences for you. Now, having said all that, what if the rationale here is, well, you have to remove all vestiges of any sort of sympathetic treatment of anybody involved in the Confederacy from Arlington, why wouldn't they exhume the bodies? Why wouldn't that be the logical next step? Why wouldn't they just dig up the grave sites? Forget leaving them intact and safely guarding them. Why wouldn't the appetite here be, let's remove them entirely? Because you can guess that's coming, isn't it? We're not far away from that. We're only a few minutes away from that. All right, so the Biden administration continues its efforts, although the court is pushing back on him, at least for the moment, to remove a monument dedicated to the reconciliation of the country in the wake of the Civil War. And as I pointed out, Sean Davis said today, hey, what does this mean for the future of any reconciliation? It's kind of the left sending you a signal, right? They're not interested in reconciliation. They don't want to ever come back together. It's a dangerous warning shot, isn't it? And, of course, it's also erasing their own history, taking down anything that reminds people of the history of the Democrat Party, what it truly represents, why it got started in the first place. Here is in studio now, Corey Ganamworth, the producer of the Vince Coglianese Show, is here, as you might expect, because it's his job, but also because, Corey, you were out this morning at Arlington. What did you see when you got there?
Yeah, I took the walk this morning, walked through the cemetery. As always, it's a pretty grounding, humbling experience walking through the graveyards. And I was approaching this monument where I knew it was. I was probably about 300 yards away at the time, and a police officer actually had a car stopped on the street that I was walking on, and he told me I couldn't go any further than that. And I said, "Why, officer? Can you tell me why?" He's like, "Well, no, I'm not at the pleasure of telling you why." I was like, "Okay." So I went another route.
So somebody told this guy, not only are you blocking people from getting to this site, you're not allowed to tell them why.
Yeah, he would not tell me why. I said, "Could you please explain?" He said he wasn't allowed to. So I went another route, and I walked around the monument, kept it in my sight, and as I approached it, it looked like I was the only one there other than the employees that were working on it. There were probably about 25 construction workers all huddled up doing a bunch of nothing. They were watching one guy set up a crane and another guy with a lift.
This is like a construction site stereotype.
Yeah, exactly. How many construction workers does it take to actually do the work? But what I was watching was they were setting up this crane, and eventually by the time I left, the crane was over top of the monument. They were lowering some kind of rope down towards it. I watched that for a good 15 minutes or so, and it just kind of stalled. Nothing was going on, but it was discerning to watch. Like, I was surprised there were no media, nobody there other than two people maybe 10 minutes after I got there, and they weren't necessarily part of
because when
media.
Democrats orchestrate a memory hole blackout, they really know how to do it.
Yeah.
Like, the media don't even show up.
Yeah, there was nobody really there. So I took a video, I took a bunch of pictures, I posted it on my Twitter. And I was trying to get a good look at who the construction the construction workers, who they were representing, who was hired. I think I got some good pictures of that I tweeted. Apparently their message boards on Yelp are being flooded, that they shouldn't be doing this. So I've seen a few messages like that, but it was just, as we already know, it's always a solemn, humbling experience being there. But then just to see these monuments, this history being deleted, it was sad. It felt sad.
Yeah. Well, you have more reverence for Arlington than the Biden administration does. That's for sure. Corey, thank you for that report. We'll keep you posted as we learn more. And coming up today, John Reed joins us at 4:30 with a deeper dive into this issue. It's an important one. It involves, knowing something about the history of our country, which is more than the left wants you to do. Coming up, Joe Concha joins us on the other side of the news. Well, good afternoon to you. 3:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up today, we're going to be joined by John Reed at 4:30. A Richmond radio host. Will chat with him about this effort by the Biden administration to remove a monument to national reconciliation from the wake of the Civil War. Big story today. And then 5 o'clock, Corey DeAngelis is here, just named by one of the top teachers union officials in the country as her enemy. Corey DeAngelis will react to that honor coming up, 5 o'clock. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Let's talk a little bit about the mayor of Boston, Massachusetts. Her name is Michelle Wu, and recently she decided that she would hold a Christmas party that was a no whites allowed. It was for electeds of color. No whites allowed. It was not for the white people. It was only for non-white people. That was the Christmas party she planned. She's the actual mayor of Boston, Massachusetts. It's not like, some crazy person ranting on a street corner who says they're the mayor. This is Michelle Wu. She's Harvard educated. You might not be surprised to hear. And the mistake they made in their incompetency was that they sent out the invite to the anybody but white people Christmas party to a bunch of white people by accident. They accidentally sent it. And so she came out and she apologized for accidentally sending the email to the white people. Here is Michelle Wu.
I think we've had individual conversations with everyone so people understand that it was truly just an honest mistake that went out in typing the email field. I look forward to celebrating with everyone at the holiday parties that we will have
separate
besides
parties.
This one as well.
Separate but equal parties.
So it is my intention that we can, again, be a city that lives our values and creates space for all kinds of communities to come together.
This is one of the craziest stories of the year, and it's good. I'm glad we can end the year with this one. Let's go now to Joe Concha. He is a columnist for The Messenger, a Fox News contributor, and the author of the book, Come On, Man, The Truth About Joe Biden's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Presidency. Joe, good afternoon to you, sir.
You sell that book better than anybody I go on with, so thank you. 500 copies, 12%.
It's my favorite title. Honestly, I'm not even joking. It's my favorite title. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Joe,
I wish you could take credit for it.
Joe, let's talk about this Boston mayor, Michelle Wu. So I was just saying a moment ago, she went to Harvard, obviously, and now she's the mayor of Boston. And she thinks that throwing a no whites allowed Christmas party is something that a mayor does. How did that happen?
How did it happen? Well, apparently this has been going on for several years. But the difference this time is that they accidentally sent it to the white folks who happen to be on the city council. They actually make up a majority of the Boston City Council. There's 13 members on that council. 7 are white. They got the invitation. Then 15 minutes later, instead of saying, hey, you know what, why don't we just have everybody there? It's the spirit of the holiday. Bring the city together, unity, all that fun stuff. They sent out an email saying, sorry, this accidentally was sent out to you guys. You're not invited. And they went ahead and had this party that only consisted of blacks, Asians, and anybody who's considered a minority. Now, here's the funny thing, Vince. Michelle Wu's own husband, if he tried to attend this party, would not get past the bouncers because he is a white guy. Right? So the hypocrisy here is overwhelming. And the fact that it's 2023 and we have mayors of major cities socially segregating at this point is insane. And could you imagine, and I'll leave it here, a white mayor of a major city saying, sorry, whites only. If you're black, you're Hispanic, you're Jewish, you're Hispanic, don't bother coming. Maybe just go to the local Arby's instead and have fun. So that's imagine the reaction if we ever saw something like that. It would be 24/7 for 3 weeks.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and she's got a history of things like this.
Hold on one second. Can you go right here, sir?
Okay, we're waiting.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I'm going to the city right now to go on Larry Kudlow's show, and we almost missed a turn for the Lincoln Tunnel. Would have resulted in me missing it.
I thought you were going to say you forgot your bulletproof vest and your helmet. You needed to turn back for it. Yeah, no,
I did forget that.
Did you? Oh man, you're going to make me talk about a different subject. I'm not going to talk about it yet, though. Let me focus on Boston for a moment. So we've got Michelle Wu. She's got a history of saying stuff like this. Here she is at a St. Patrick's Day breakfast. Listen to this.
In just over 100 days, we have connected unhoused residents at Mass and Cass to housing, treatment, and services. We've launched 3 free bus lines. We've taken some big, bold actions, but I won't lie. This past winter was pretty intense. Trial by snow, trial by fire, fighters union. I'm getting used to dealing with problems that are expensive, disruptive, and white. I'm talking about snowflakes. I mean snowstorm snowflakes.
Yeah, you see the kind of casual jokes here where she's joking about her open bigotry. She's like, yeah, I hate things that are white. Oh, just talking about snowflakes. She's very cheeky. I mean, I can't even imagine. Like, again, roles reversed here. If somebody was cracking jokes about Asian people and yellow and black people and black, and then be like, I'm talking about something else that's black, and it's like, no, that wouldn't fly, dude. Not as the mayor of Boston.
There would be calls for resignation, and rightly so, quite frankly, right? And the fact that she's getting away with this is because CNN or MSNBC, which scream racism every other word, it's like third behind the and maybe but, right? Then race or racism. That's the number one word said on those networks. They barely talked about this. And then when I did tune into Bill Maher on Friday night, they did have a girl named Laura Coates on there that was actually defending the mayor. You know,
what?
So yeah, just like, well, you know, everybody needs their spaces, and minorities should be able to congregate on their own without feeling under pressure from other races. Like, what are you talking? What year do you live in?
So would that logic apply? Would that logic apply to this group that we call white people? Like affinity spaces? Like, so we currently have a U.S. Senator, Sheldon Whitehouse, who has an affinity space for white people. He goes to a club that's exclusively white. They don't let anybody else in. And so is that now allowed? Is that like the standard?
Apparently it is. And I can't get over, just to get back to what she said about firefighters in Boston for a second, because she was talking about the firefighters union. I have to deal with problems that are exclusively white. I mean, so not only is she making a bad racial joke, but you're insulting Boston firefighters who run into burning buildings because the majority of them are white. Then that somehow is a joke. Like, I don't even understand her humor for that matter. But to your point, she went to Harvard, and this is the way these folks come out of here,
For sure.
and they end up running cities like this.
Well,
and it's just a scary time right now if you're a Boston resident, and this is your leader.
Well, the other thing about Harvard is that they explicitly do this at school too. They have black-only graduation ceremonies. So
Yeah.
This is
Columbia University did, UC Berkeley did, all three.
yes, and then the left calls this. It's so funny the language they use because it's like so euphemistic for what they're really doing. They call it like race affinity groups and like affinity events or whatever. But what it is racial segregation. It's explicitly. It's just the Democrats of new are the Democrats of old. They are segregationists, and yet
they are.
And but the standard here is that we're all supposed to, not say anything about it, just nod along and say that this is progress.
It's just insane, Vince. And I mentioned CNN and MSNBC before. The print pages, also the op-ed pages of the New York Times, Washington Post, but most importantly, the Boston Globe, which is the biggest paper in Boston in that area, and not one op-ed condemning this. So apparently everybody's okay with this if you're on the left.
They're
Right?
cowards.
It just shows you the hypocrisy. Yeah, cowards is a perfect word for it.
Then of course we also saw this from Lori Lightfoot, the former mayor of Chicago, when she decided that she would only do interviews with reporters who are not white. So no whites allowed was her plan for interviews. And it took a lawsuit against her for her to finally have to be knocked down in court that, no, you can't do that. You can't say that you'll only do interviews with people who aren't a certain skin color. What are you, crazy?
She said, but yeah, only journalists of black and brown skin. Again, we just can play this game all day. What if we had Michael Bloomberg when he was mayor of New York saying, I'm only going to do interviews with only those of Caucasian descent. I mean, they would be calling for him to step down right then and there. And what I liked about that story with Lightfoot was then an Hispanic reporter that was supposed to do an interview with her canceled on her, said, no, this is wrong, and I'm not going to even waste my time doing this. So there was some pushback there. Now Lori Lightfoot is the ex-mayor of Chicago. And you look at the approval ratings right now, Vince, of three major American cities as far as approval ratings of Democratic mayors. Eric Adams in New York is at 28%. Brandon Johnson, the other Let's Go Brandon, Chicago, just got elected just a couple months ago. He's at 28%. London Breed's at like 33%. So it's amazing. All these three of these folks can probably run for a re-election and probably win again. That's the problem. Like, these approval ratings go low, but they'll never elect a Republican in any of these cities, and that's obviously a problem when it's a one-party system in places like Massachusetts, Illinois, and California.
Yeah, but there was a survey on this issue of this problem, how pervasive it is. There was a Harvard Harris poll that came out this past week that found something like 70% of people in the 18 to 24 age group think that white people are oppressors and that our society should be oriented towards that viewpoint. And it's like,
wow. And go ahead.
What? No, it's a sign that it doesn't seem like it's going to get better anytime soon. If the youngest generation of adults is already so brainwashed on this subject that they think that racial prejudice and segregation is a normal thing for them to be pursuing.
And that's the thing. You can get rid of all the university presidents that you like Liz McGill at Penn, right, or Claudine Gay at Harvard. No, that is a very, very small part of this cancer. And the Crimson, the Harvard student newspaper, they actually polled professors on campus and asked them, what ideology would you think pertains to you? And 97%, Vince, said either somewhat liberal or very liberal. Less than 2% said conservative. So as long as we just keep hiring the same people with the same mindset and we completely dismiss true diversity, which is diversity of ideas and thoughts and perspectives, this is going to continue.
Yes.
The hiring practices are a whole bowl of wrong already.
And let me, just to dive in deeper on this data, just so people can understand, if anybody who's older than 25, that is the minority view that I just laid out. I'll read the question to you. It says, there's an ideology that white people are oppressors and non-white people and people of certain groups have been oppressed and as a result should be favored today at universities and for employment. Do you support or oppose this ideology? Every other age group by a majority opposes that ideology except for 18 to 24. 79% of respondents agree. with that sentiment, that racial prejudice and discrimination should be the way our society operates?
Wow, 3 words. Yeah, we're doomed. If this is the mindset of folks that age, and there's a poll just came out on Joe Biden that's horrific, just like the most recent polls have been. He's at 34% approval in a Monmouth University poll, but then you dig deeper into the crosstabs, Vince, and you see that he's only at 23% approval among young voters. He polls worse with those between 18 and 24 than any other age group, and the reason why you've seen this huge drop is because so many of them think that Hamas's actions were justified on October 7th, and they're anti-Israel. So that's just, if you want to sleep well tonight, go read that poll and go to a college campus sometime in the Northeast or even in California for that matter, because this is what these kids truly believe. And it comes from somewhere, and it's probably coming from these professors and TikTok and all those fun places. All I know is my kids are going south, way south. Nowhere near Harvard or even Georgetown for that matter. Clemson. I think Clemson sounds like a nice place.
So what do you make of this thing that it came out? It was a leak, of course. It was strategically leaked. That Kamala Harris disagrees with Joe Biden on his Israel policy. That she's much more pro-Hamas than he is. Why would she leak that?
She sees the polls and probably says, "Boy, the left flank of my party," and she is on the very left flank. I know they did a study on her voting record while she was in the Senate, and she was the most liberal of any senator of all 100. So, of course, she's going to align with the squad more. She's going to align with Joe Biden and being pro-Israel. But why would she leak that? Maybe she thinks she really is Plan B, that Joe Biden is going to step down or not make it to 2024. But she's more like a Plan Z at this point. I mean, she actually polls lower than Biden. That's really hard to do.
Right. Part of me thinks it was just to see how much more unpopular she could become. She's like, let's see if we can go for a record here. I'm on Hamas's side now. Let's see what they think of that. Anyway. All right. Well, Joe Concha, good luck with your trip to New York. I know it's always perilous, so we are.
I am underwater as we speak. Yes, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Vince.
Good to talk to you. That's Joe Concha over at Fox News and so many other places. And, of course, the name of his book, Come On, Man. I love that. Love that book title. It is $3.49 now. All right, let's go to the phones. We've got Earlene calling in from Dumfries on line 3. Earlene, you're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Yeah, I was listening to you about having this all-black party or all-white party, whatever.
Yeah.
What about somebody that's mixed race?
I don't know. What do you do to, demonstrate your racial affiliation at the door? Are they just checking you, with paint swatches or something? I don't even really get the concept. It's like, have a party for the people who are in the government or don't. Why would you do it based on race, Earlene?
Well, because somebody's obviously racist in the government, that's why.
Yeah, and it happens to be the mayor of Boston.
And what about somebody puts on blackface? Would they get to go in the party?
Yeah, I know. Who knows? By her ridiculous standards, maybe so. And they'd probably have to be like Ralph Northam or something, though. That's Ralph would get in with the blackface. He's done it before.
They might have to prove that, how much of my ancestry is black and how much of my ancestry is white.
Yeah, there you go.
I just go in.
Yeah, you bring your Ancestry.com results with you in order to gain admission to the Christmas party. Earlene.
Isn't that terrible?
Honestly, it's terrible, but it's par for the course for the left, certainly throughout history, and it's rearing its ugly head again. Earlene, thank you very much. She raises a lot of good points. Why are they doing this? Let's go to Greg now, calling in from Olney on line 1. Greg, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Thanks, Vince. I just wanted to say, this whole thing with Ben Cardin, the staffer truly despises, the institution of the Senate. He arguably despises the institution of the Senate more so than anybody that, came in there on January 6th. I mean, it's to do that in the so-called hallowed halls of the Senate is reprehensible, and Ben Cardin should resign immediately.
In case anybody missed what Greg is talking about, and I don't know how you could have missed it. It was everywhere this weekend. United States Senate staffer for Ben Cardin was caught, doing the dirty with another man, both of them men, on one of the desks inside of a Senate hearing room. And not just caught, he filmed it himself. They filmed it and then posted it to the internet, and subsequently the Daily Caller published a censored version of the footage. I will tell you a little bit more of the behind the scenes of how that all went down, seeing as I'm an editor at the Daily Caller as well. I knew that was coming Friday. So this guy, of course, he's disgracing the entire institution by engaging in that insane act inside the Senate, Greg.
Yep.
Disgraceful.
And he also was recently promoted. He was also recently promoted.
Yeah, what was the role he was promoted to? I saw him. I saw something going around, like a chief of staff job or something. Greg just left, so he didn't answer the question. But either way, he was working in the Senate, and he was working for Ben Cardin. That's all true. That's all true. Okay, hold on. I've got some more detail about how that story came to fruition. I'll tell you about that in a moment. And we've got Joe Biden and his motorcade. Biden was literally being asked why his campaign is crashing as a car smashed into his motorcade. I don't know. How many more signs are we going to get that this isn't going well? That's ahead.